reading from T.S. Eliot, lines 206 through 215. For most of us, there is only the unintended moment, the moment in and out of time, the distraction fit, lost in a shaft of sunlight, the wild time unseen, or the winter lightning, or the waterfall, or the music heard so deeply that it is not heard at all. But you are the music while the music lasts. There are only hints and guesses, hints followed by guesses, and the rest is prayer, observation, discipline, thought, and action. The hint half guessed, the gift half understood, is incarnation.
Let us prepare our hearts and minds for this moment with a special prayer. Please join with me in prayer. Gracious God, we pray that the words of my mouth, the poetry of T.S. Eliot, and the meditations of all of our hearts might be acceptable to you, O God, who is our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. As with so many great cities around the world, Cleveland has been defined by the river that runs through it, almost more than any other single geographical factor. Previously, even more winding and crooked than it is today, the river defined this geography in so many ways. From providing the Erie and the Iroquois peoples with rich grounds and waters for swimming and fishing and dancing and hunting, as immortalized in the REM song, Cuyahoga, to offering ease of navigation for industrialists like John D. Rockefeller and his Standard Oil Company and J.P. Morgan's U.S. Steel. The river ensured that the land around its opening into the Lake Erie would be treasured for generations to come. In more recent years, as bad luck would have it, that same river has served as a symbol for all things that were not well with our major metropolises. From deep-seated racism to environmental degradation. Regardless and almost in defiance of such human disregard, the mighty Cuyahoga rolls on. T.S. Eliot, in his third poem in the series, gathered as the classic poetry set, The Four Quartets, uses the river as his foundational image, and by extension, the sea and the ocean. It seems Eliot had some acquaintance with the great Mississippi River when he grew up in America as a child. But it feels, as we read these first words, that he knew the Cuyahoga somehow personally. When he ponders, I do not know much about gods, but I think the river is a strong brown god, sullen and untamed and intractable, patient to some degree. At first recognized as frontier, useful but untrustworthy as a conveyor of commerce, then only a problem confronting a builder of bridges. The problem once solved, the brown god almost forgotten by the dwellers dwellers in the cities. Ever, however, implacable, keeping his seasons and rages, destroyer, reminder of what men choose to forget, unhonored, unpropitiated by worshipers of this machine, but waiting, watching, waiting. Could Eliot have known how much commerce would be amplified inordinately by our river, only a stone's throw from us right now? Could Eliot have envisioned the multitude of bridges now brightly lit up that span its bends and twists? Could Eliot have imagined how so many have forgotten or have tried their best to forget about the burning river? Forget the power the river has? Only to be reminded, like we have this last week, of how rivers can rage when torrents of runoff from snow emergencies and rainstorms threaten to make its overflow of its natural boundaries. The river will not let us forget it is there. So it is most fitting for Eliot to use the image of rivers and seas to talk about the mighty flow of time throughout our lives. Time, like an ever-flowing stream, bears us all away. There is no end but addition, the trailing consequence of further days and hours, Eliot pines. Where is the end of them? The poet wonders and then answers himself, there is no end to it. Having grounded us first in this rolling brown river, Eliot then interweaves musings about time with images of prayer and annunciation, thus turning our thoughts to things more worshipful and liturgical. So there's no great leap of imagination to cause one to think about the greatest marker of time. And those of us in the Judeo-Christian tradition should make this leap more easily. For our great marker of time is the Sabbath, Sunday morning. It still remains in our worshipful work, the reminder that a week has passed, or more appropriately, a week is beginning. From the very first grand shaping of creation and time itself, the final marker for work that was well done was the Sabbath day, the seventh day, and God rested. Throughout the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, Sabbath was defined as a countercultural act of both resistance of our human attempts to be God and the greatest act of devotion to the only one who can be God. Sabbath. Sabbath. Though never using the word Sabbath, I believe Eliot captures the very power of Sabbath as an act of remembering what is deeper, what is more important in life, when he writes, "It seems as one becomes older that the past has another pattern and ceases to be a mere sequence or even development. The latter a partial fallacy, encouraged by superficial notions of evolution, which become in the popular mind a means of disowning the past. The moments of happiness, not the sense of well-being." I think Eliot is capturing what Sabbath is always meant to try and do for us, is to remember the past but not get caught up by it. And to make each week suddenly filled city dwellers and bridge spanners tend to forget, time marches on. The mighty river rolls underneath us. So we, like passengers on a train or a plane, tend to forget to mark the passage of time with moments of rest, of unfettered time, of recharging, as David called us in the communion meditation, of Sabbath. Why is this so? Why do we modern people, why do we city dwellers especially, forget the importance of taking time to rest? I just saw again the movie, The Devil Wears Prada. How many of y'all have seen it? One of Meryl Streep's greatest roles. And in it, there is no better example of a city dweller who has worked her entire life to forget rest. Who has crafted a world where stepping back is unthought of, where allowing oneself to be sick or ill or sad has no place. Craig and I, at the end of watching the movie, because I had just told Craig about what I was preaching on Sunday, laughed out loud to each other and said, that woman could use some Sabbath in her life. Why is it that someone like me has to have an illness come across my path to be reminded of the power of Sabbath? You knew that I always preach these things. I don't live it, right? Well, the great biblical scholar, my favorite scholar of all time, Walter Brueggemann, reminds us that it's natural that we've allowed this understanding of Sabbath to fall off our radar screen, to become an anathema, to be an illusion, because we've been duped by the powers that be, the pharaohs of our lives, into believing that we are judged ultimately by our productivity and our performance rather than our faithfulness to God. And even saying that, I realize that we have so wrapped around the word faithful, hard work, exhausting work, that it's hard for us to hear that faith has nothing to do with working hard. Faithfulness is a turn of the heart that you cannot manipulate, that I cannot work for any more than I could turn the moon into real cheese. Faithfulness is a turn of the heart. It is called upon by the Spirit and has so little to do with the work of our hands or our feet. The pharaohs of our lives have duped us, because God is not dependent on how many bricks we have produced. Brueggemann writes extensively about this, and this was the most exquisite thing, and it came to me this week when I needed to hear it most. So what is it that makes us people so weary? It's not working hard that makes us weary. In fact, working hard is a good thing. You hear that? Working hard is a good thing, but rather living a life that is against the grain of our creatureliness. Being placed in a false position so that our day-to-day operation requires us to contradict what we know best about ourselves and what we love the most about being children of God. Exhaustion comes from the demand that we be, in some measure, other than we truly are. And such an alienation from our very selves requires too much energy to navigate. Like the river, we are forced into new patterns to try and make us more and more productive. So we try to speed up time by trying to make our trains and planes faster. Our wait time at the RTA station or at Hopkins as minimal as possible. We try to make our lives more and more productive. Imagining God as Pharaoh or a big boss or industrial tycoon. We try to please God by making Sundays anything but Sabbath days. And then spending the rest of the week feeling horrible that we haven't laid at the feet of this demanding God enough prayers, or enough offerings, or enough service, or enough study, or enough whatever. And God gets angry. And so what do? We just stop going. But Brueggemann helps us see another way. Of course it's never enough. Of course it's never enough, for our anxious sense of responsibility will never touch the truth of creation. For the truth of creation, without any regard for us or our need to make it right, is that God ordained the world in abundance. That God has ordained into creation, and as a result, we, like the Creator on the sixth day, have our nafshim, our whole selves, depleted. He's saying that God works hard and is exhausted like us. But we, unlike the Creator, do not take a seventh day for refreshment. Because unlike the Creator, we are too anxious to rest. Which is another way of saying that God requires rest. Why don't we? Who do we think we are? This is why we are called to engage in the spiritual disciplines of the faith. And the most primary one being Sabbath rest. See, this is so hard to get into our minds. Because we are called to honor God by being. And some of the best ways of being are spiritual disciplines. Which, in our modern mind, seems to say we have to work. But a spiritual discipline is anything but work. When it's honestly and genuinely engaged, and when it is practiced. They're the ancient spiritual disciplines of prayer and confession, of service to others, and of almsgiving, and Sabbath. Whether it be the discipline of prayer, or the discipline of study, or confession, or service, or almsgiving, or hospitality, or our Sabbath keeping, discipline puts us here between the hither and the farther shore, while time is withdrawn so we can consider the future and the past with an equal mind at the moment which is not of action or inaction. Eliot talks in words that remind us of that Celtic spiritual principle of the liminality of life. That place where the sacred and the divine come so close. It's called a thin place. Spiritual disciplines help us get close to that thin place where we can feel and see, maybe even smell God in real terms. This is a wonderful place from which to view one's own life and the depth of meaning of God's love. And that is the purpose of a discipline, is not to make us work harder, but to give us the pattern so we don't have to work hard at all. The shame is we moderns labeled spiritual disciplines as ancient traditions, put them in a box, and hid the box away. So of course when you're going to bring out study of the Bible, or daily prayer, or weekly Sabbath, it's going to feel a little bit like work, because like a muscle that hasn't been used for a long time, it's just going to hurt a little bit. It's going to take a little while. There's nothing magic about spiritual disciplines, but by doing them, you find a mystery, this thin place where God is so palpable. What is the purpose of all these disciplines if not to make us more productive workers or citizens or Christians, which it's not? Perhaps spiritual disciplines are only a simple way to help us be more fully ourselves, the very beings God created us to be, which is another way of saying that spiritual disciplines help us be invested in our lives, or dare I say, be incarnate in our lives. So I end with these beautiful words from Dry Salvages. For most of us, there is only the unattended moment, the moment in and out of time, the distraction fit lost in a shaft of sunlight, the wild time unseen, or the winter lightning, or the waterfall, or the music heard so deeply that it's not heard at all, but you are the music while the music lasts. These are only hints and guesses, hints followed by guesses, and the rest is prayer, observance, discipline, thought, and action. The hint half guessed, the gift half understood, is incarnation. May it be so. May it be so.